Welcome back to Americanuck Radio. This is your host, Mike Phillip, coming at you live from Western Canada in the province of Alberta. We've got Super Don Naylor down in Louisiana, Professor Mike in Ottawa. The call-in line is 855-660-4261. Once again, 855-660-4261. Now, if you want to get updates on news, health, entertainment, sports, we've got it all over at Americanuckradio.com. That's AmericanUCKRadio.com. And you can also contact us there with ideas for the show. You can also get us on our Facebook page, Americanuck Radio, and the Twitter account, _American. Now, we've got a great guest to bring on here to discuss some very important topics that are facing our society here in Canada and the United States today. His name is Bryan Cheeseboro. He's a historian of the American Civil War era, 1830s to 1870s. He works in Washington, D.C. for the U.S. National Archives. For Bryan, history is not just a job, it's also a hobby. He's a Civil War reenactor, and his family sometimes accompanies him to these events. Cool stuff. How you doing today, Bryan?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very good.
Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks for having me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, sir. It's an honor. Now, I'd like to point out the reason that we have Bryan Cheeseboro on the show is because we had posted a short rant on our YouTube channel, Americanuck Radio, about the media kerfuffle surrounding Bill O'Reilly's rebuttal to Michelle Obama's comments at the DNC about waking up in a house every day that was built by slaves. And a lot of people thought that Bill O'Reilly was being cavalier and somehow justifying slavery. A lot of people thought that he was just making historical statements. But a robust chat broke out underneath the sound clip, and Bryan joined in. And I thought, you know what? This guy is a historian. He studies the Civil War, and he'd be great to have on. Now, Bryan, I got to ask you, would you go to these Civil War reenactments? Are you a Union or Confederate soldier?
I am a Union soldier, specifically the unit I'm in is the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, which most people would recognize from the movie Glory, although I do, different United States colored troop units, fall in with black regiments. Sometimes I fall in with white regiments, too.
That's great, and I bet your family has a great time at these events. Hey, it looks like a lot. I've never been to one, but it looks like a lot of fun from the videos I've seen.
They can be a lot of fun, and we do all different kinds of events, from big battle reenactments, which involve setting up tents, which it's actually more like glorified camping, I guess, but
right.
But also some small living history things. So yes, it's fun, but also I think it's great to take that time when we're all dressed up and stuff to talk to people about history, and just give them something they didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to know your past. You got to know where you came from. And that's why we have Bryan on the show, everybody. I figured that you would be in a unique position to give some historical perspective on the Civil War and specifically slavery in the United States. Now, this is such a polarizing issue. I mean,
it is.
People are fighting over it online. You've got the Black Lives Matter movement. You've got people engaging in physical violence or the advocating of it on both sides. I mean, I've seen people who claim to be Black Lives Matter online talking about we need more dead cops, we need to kill white people. I've seen white people in chat rooms saying we need to kill all these Black Lives Matter people. Now listen up. I am an unrepentant Christian, okay? That's on a personal note. And my God commands that I love my neighbor. And my God also commands that I forgive other people that I might be forgiven.
Right.
And that is that's my be-all, end-all in all of this. Now, Bryan, It is my opinion, may it be uneducated or not, that the American Civil War was not just over slavery. I believe it was more economic. Now, I don't want to be wrong. Could you please get into your historical view, and an educated one at that, on what happened leading up to the Civil War and why? I'm going to let you go. Go ahead, Bryan.
Well, I know certainly that many people have looked at what caused the Civil War or why the Civil War was fought. And a lot of times there are reasons that people come up with that say it was something other than slavery. Slavery in the 19th century, as I've studied, really ends up becoming the biggest issue that divided America during that time period. And you know, it's easy to look back now, and when we see slavery depicted in a program like Roots or in something like 12 Years a Slave or Underground, that program that came on WGN or something like that, we're focused on how slaves were treated and so on. But really, for a lot of people, the way we study it often can be looked at as a political issue. And by that, what I mean is the political power that came from slavery for those people that were engaged in the institution, those white people, I guess, really. And on the other hand, you know, for Northerners, many of them opposed slavery. Didn't necessarily mean that they were in favor of African-American rights or black people's rights, but it just means that they basically opposed the spread of slavery, the spread of that political power that came out of slavery.
Fair enough. There was a lot of lives lost on both sides of that war. Do you have any kind of numbers as to the human toll of the Civil War?
The number that existed for a long time, or has existed, was about 620,000 that were that's killed, that's casualties, killed, wounded, I guess missing, never seen again, or whatever. Some have said now that number may be as high as 750,000. What it may actually be. I haven't done any real study yet to find out which one of those is correct. Obviously, any of that is far too much, and it's very sad, I think, that something like that had to happen. I've heard many times that other nations ended something like slavery without violence. But I wanted to read to you just a quick note. This is something I've been reading a book called The Civil War, The First Year Told by Those Who Lived It. It's part of a set from the Library of America. And when, before the war started, you know, secession took place where states left the Union, South Carolina being the first to do so. And what they did often was they sent out these people called apostles of secession, people who went out to spread this gospel of secession to leave the Union. And one man, a man named Stephen Hale, he wrote a letter to someone else where he was basically explaining why. And just in quick excerpts of that letter, therefore, this is December 1860, therefore it is that the election of Mr. Lincoln cannot be regarded otherwise than a solemn declaration on the part of a great majority of the Northern people of hostility to the South, her property, and her institutions, as speaking of slavery. Nothing less than an open declaration of war for the triumph of this new theory of government destroys the property of the South, lays waste her fields, and inaugurates all the horrors of a San Domingo servile insurrection, consigning her citizens to assassination and her wives and daughters to pollution and violation to gratify the lust of half-civilized Africans.
We're going to have to pick it up from there on the other side. Mike Super Don with Bryan Cheeseboro. We'll be back after this on Americanuck Radio. Welcome back to Americanuck Radio. This is your host, Mike Phillip. The call-in line is 855-660-4261. And with us, we have a really great guest, Mr. Bryan Cheeseboro of the U.S. National Archives. And I'd just like to say that he is not here on behalf of the U.S. National Archives. He's here because he's a historian, and he has a great interest in getting the truth out about historical events, specifically the Civil War and slavery. Now, before the break, Bryan was reading from a letter, one of the few actual bird's eye view accounts from the time. Could you pick up where you left off, please, Bryan?
Sure, Mike. That again was a letter written by one man, a secession advocate, to another, basically explaining, look, this is why we have to do this. Lincoln has just won this election, and just even the apparent fear that Mr. Lincoln would be involved in doing away with slavery was enough to make people upset and concerned. And as this person, clearly pointed out, what he believed would happen if we, in slavery, when all of a sudden we're going to have people out of control, we're going to have blacks, just doing all manner of things. And, the servile insurrection he's talking about is what took place in, Santo Domingo in Haiti. Before the Civil War, this was something that white Southerners were deathly afraid of, that slaves in the United States would rebel, and there would be just this open race war, basically, that could take place, and it would be the same result that happened, which created the country of Haiti, by the way.
That's interesting because there have been people openly calling for race war throughout the years. Charles Manson talked about a coming race war, and it said that the things that they did, him and the Manson family, were to incriminate blacks in order to kick it off. So there have been a lot of people ever since talking about a race war, and I've heard it on both sides of the aisle. Now, myself...
Right, there have been, you're right. And the thing about it is that my main issue with that passage, of course, is that when you see people in such a manner, when you decide that this group of people, that's what they're capable of, certainly every group has people who are, criminals, violent, whatever it is, but also has people that aren't. And then we decide that we're going to, decide that all of those people in that group are this kind of person. Then obviously you're doing things unfairly to some people who that's not where they are, but also, too, that you might miss people in other groups. And I think that's a lot of what this conversation is right now, that when people talk about white privilege and so on, that we might be missing, because we're focused on, blacks or whatever it is as criminal or whatever, we might be missing other people that are really capable of those things.
Well, exactly. And I mean, I'd like to point out that a whole lot of young white men lost their lives dying in a civil war to free slaves. And the other thing I'd like to say about that, you talked about painting an entire group. Just locally, I know people here in Canada that will say things like, Americans, all they do all day is run around shooting black man. And it's like this... Are you serious? You think that's what's happening in the United States, is that just white people are running around killing blacks and that's it? I mean, it goes on everywhere, and everybody is looking to point a finger. Now, you've got groups like Black Lives Matter, and you mentioned that there's going to be criminals in every group. I mean, I said in an earlier conversation that I had with you, the Vancouver Canucks lost the Stanley Cup to the Boston Bruins, and there were riots in the streets of Vancouver. Now, most of those rioters and people destroying property were not hockey fans. They just wanted an excuse to riot. And I think that the same thing happens when you get a lot of people together and people are whipped up in a frenzy. Now, the reason that we came together was because of Michelle Obama's comments about waking up in a house built by slaves every day. Now, I saw that as being divisive. Okay, that was my take on it. What was your take on that?
My take on it was that she was simply talking about historical fact. The fact is, slave labor contributed to the building of the White House. real quick, the White House basically has three major constructions. The first being from 1792 to 1800 when the building was first erected. And then in 1814, the British, during the War of 1812, burned the White House. And I believe construction started again right after the war, or whatever it was, 1816 or so, and then rebuilt. And then in the Truman administration, after World War II, the White House was again gutted and rebuilt again. So, I mean, you can say that all of those people involved with that were part of the White House construction. By the way, I wanted to mention a quick story. Years ago, back in the 1980s, I was working downtown D.C., and they did some renovations to the White House then, and they had stripped the paint off the White House. And I remember driving by it, and you could see the burn marks from the burning of the White House during the War of 1812.
It was a bunch of Canadians that burned it, wasn't it?
It was actually the British Army. Basically, the War of 1812, and I've learned this in recent years, it was basically the United States versus Canada until that British Army invasion occurred in the summer of 1814 with the Battle of Bladensburg, which isn't that far from right outside Washington, D.C. And then they made their way to the city of Washington and burned several buildings in the city, the White House, the Capitol, and so on, and then made their way up to Baltimore, and eventually that's where, well, you know the story with Francis Scott Key and the Star Spangled Banner when he wrote that there. But I just was mentioning the case of seeing the burn marks on the White House, and it was so powerful to me because it's like this really happened. This is just something in a history book that somebody made up.
Kind of brings it to life, hey?
More powerful than, excuse me?
Kind of brings it to life.
Right. Yeah, almost more powerful than the than reading it in an actual document, just seeing that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I didn't see the comment as divisive at all. I mean, and I think what she was trying to say was that 200 years ago, I could have been one of those slaves building the White House or something. 200 years ago, there's no way I could have been First Lady, but look how far we've come. And look at the fact that, yes, an ancestor of hers or whatever could have been involved in building the White House. As I mentioned on your board, just she wakes up every day to that, but so did Betty Ford, Rosalind Carter, Nancy Reagan, Hillary Clinton. All of them woke up in the same building built by the people who built it.
Interesting stuff. I would like to open up the floor to Mike and Super Dawn. They've got some comments they would like to make as well. Dawn, go ahead.
Yeah, last week when we were talking about this particular topic, when I went and did some research, because I wanted to try and wrap my head around as much of the issue with the slavery back during the Civil War and when the White House was built, I came across an article which kind of surprised me a little bit. And in this article, it talks about how during colonial America, there were also white slaves that were brought from Europe, the Scottish in particular, and that white slavery was a part of colonial America as well. Do you know anything about that? Is that something that is true?
I do know something about it, yes. There was the indentured servitude that went on, where basically this was a contractual agreement where people who came to America, and we should also point out, too, that, people usually who have a very successful life don't usually leave that life just to uproot and go someplace else. Certainly a lot of people, coming to America in the 1600s or 1700s were looking for a better life in any case, except for those, of course, who were forced to come here, these being African slaves or whatever. So with that indentured servitude, life could have been very hard. But I outside of that, I don't really know too much. I do know that there has been, in recent times, on the internet, there have been people who've been alleging that there were Irish who were slaves. And one of the things that's so funny about this allegation is that some of the images that they've used are not who they claim them to be at all.
Mr. Cheeseboro, we are out of time once again. I'd like to thank you for coming on the show and giving a little bit of clarity on this subject. I'd like to remind everybody that Bryan is an African-American and a great historian, and it was a real pleasure to talk to you, and we will consider having you on again. Mike, and Super Don with Americanuck Radio, back with Mike Ribeiro after this.